We're recording the interview of Robert Kowalski. This interview is being conducted by Ericka from the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 10:18 on June 22nd, 2018. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Youngstown, Ohio in December of '87.
Okay. Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My mom's Andrea Kowalski. She was a high school lunch lady. And my father is Stephen Kowalski, and he works in a machine shop.
Okay. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a brother and a sister.
And what do they do?
My brother is a iron worker, and my sister works at a winery and was the assistant director of Barnes & Noble.
Okay. Do they all still reside around Ohio?
Yes.
Okay, that's nice to have family around. What were you doing before you entered the military?
I had just gotten out of high school and wasn't really doing much of anything. I was into acting and running, so that was kind of like my niche in life.
Okay. What branch did you serve in?
I joined the Air Force.
Were you enlisted or officer?
Yes, enlisted.
Okay. Why did you choose the Air Force?
Couple of different reasons. I joined the Air Force, one because of listening to stories from my grandfather.
He was in the Air Force?
Because he served in the Air Force. So he actually had a couple of different jobs, one of them being the job I had in the Air Force. So listening to all the stories about the planes and all the places he went and different things he did was kind of like drove my passion for military service. And then I was given a stipulation at 17 that I wasn't allowed to join any other branch but the Air Force.
By who?
By my parents.
Okay.
So that was how I got them wrapped into signing my paperwork to allow me to join young.
Okay. So, parents agreed only to the Air Force. You went off to boot camp. Can you tell me about that?
Basic training was a little different. It was in San Antonio, Texas, and it was six and a half weeks, I think.
That seems short.
It does seem short.
Okay.
But I think it was 6 weeks, 8 weeks long, somewhere around there. And
do you remember anybody specific, any of your drill instructors, anybody stand out with you?
No, not really. I was the quiet kid, kept to myself, tried not to upset anybody, and kind of play the game and learn as much as I could to move on into my military career. So.
Okay, so moving into your military career, next you go to your job.
Yeah, tech school.
Okay, what was tech school like, and what was your job?
My job in the Air Force was security forces. So I was essentially an Air Force police officer. Our tech school was on the other side of our basic training base at Lackland Air Force Base.
So you did lateral transfer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I didn't go very far. It wasn't too bad. They teach you a lot of basic police work stuff that you would picture any type of police officer working, just the bare minimal basics. And then you go into a lot of like field training stuff and soldier stuff, because the security forces of the Air Force is like the infantry of the Army. We kind of work bilaterally together. We learn from each other as far as like missions and what our missions would entail, especially in a combat zone.
Okay. Thank you for that. How long was AIT? I'm sorry, tech school.
Our tech school, I think, was 3 months, 4 months long.
Oh, so quite a bit longer. And where was your first duty station?
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio.
Did you put that in your contract as a stipulation, I want to go back to Wright-Patterson, or you just got lucky enough to come home?
I got unlucky enough to come home.
Unlucky enough.
I put everywhere but Ohio, being from Ohio. I wanted to see the world, and then we know that didn't work out so well because they brought me back to Ohio.
Okay. How long were you at Wright-Patterson?
The official answer, I was at Wright-Patterson from 2007 to 2011, so about 4 years.
Okay. And was that your entire term?
That was my entire term.
Okay. Once you got to your first duty station, what was it like?
It was quite interesting for me, personally. Showing up at your first duty station, there's a lot of training involved in learning how the base operates and what the base squadron expects of you to perform your job. So I did a lot of training when I first got here. Then they send you through what's called a first term airman school, which is a couple weeks of like base orientation and understanding what's available to you as a new airman at the base, and it being the first duty station and everything. I never really completed all of that. As soon as I got partially through, almost completely through, and I was put on a deployment to Iraq. So that was like, hey, you're learning all this stuff, now we're going to need you to forget it so that we can train you for a combat zone.
And how long was that training?
I think that one was 3 months long.
Okay. And so you went to Iraq. Wow. How did that make you feel?
Iraq was different. At first I was scared. I was sent to Camp Bucca, Iraq. So it was the detention facility in southern Iraq.
Do you remember the name of this city?
It was just outside of Basra,
Okay.
just north of the Kuwaiti border. There, it was different because it was a detention facility. So when you picture a detention facility in a combat zone, you're dealing with everybody there for a reason. And that reason, 9 times out of 10, was they got caught trying to kill one of us. So having that in your mind and then having to care for these people, so these are like the worst of the worst that you could think of. The ones that didn't end up dead in combat, they kind of ended up here. So that kind of like, it throws you for an emotional loop, I guess. And then we worked alongside Iraqi corrections officers. So it was kind of like us training them to run a prison.
Okay. Can you lead me through what an average day looked like and how many hours did you work a day?
On that tour, we worked 12-hour shifts. I worked midnights. So our day would start off, and the very first thing we would do is do changeover with the previous group. Then we would have to wait a couple hours, and then we'd have to do roll call and make sure that everyone in our compound was accounted for by their number so that we could compare their number to a list and make sure no one was dead or missing. Then we'd spend most of the night patrolling the perimeter of the compound. We had 4 towers overlooking the interior of the compound. And you would sit there and pretty much do that for 12 hours a day, and that was our job, just to monitor, watch, and observe, and then provide help and assistance if needed within the compound.
Okay. In Iraq, did you have any, in your downtime, what did you do, if anything?
The first deployment, I kind of worked out a little bit. It was kind of like the only thing. I was still young, I was still new, so I was still trying to learn everything and find my feel for things. So between working out and reading was really like all I did in my spare time.
How did your parents feel about this?
My parents didn't really like the fact that I was there, let alone in technically what was considered a combat zone still, because that was one of the stipulations as to why they wanted me to join the Air Force in the first place. Was they're like, you're going to join the Air Force, you're not going to go see combat, we're not going to have to worry about you. And then here I am 6 months into just signing the paper and I'm already overseas. So
once you were there, were they still supportive of you even though they were feeling how they were feeling?
They were. I don't think they really knew the extent of what was going on. A lot of it was just, oh, you're in a detention facility. Like, so you're in a prison. You're not outside the wire. You know, you're really in no danger. But, I mean, the danger's different. Each stop in a combat zone, I mean, the danger's there. It's just different.
It's true. It is a combat zone. So, you know, unless you're at home at the house, you're not really safe. Okay, so how long was that tour?
That tour was 6 months long.
Okay, so 6 months, and then you came back home?
Yes.
All right, back to Wright Pat.
Back to Wright Pat.
Now, did you finish your initial training, or did they stick you in a job? Please tell me what happened.
They stuck me in my job.
Okay.
Expecting me to be up to par with everybody that had not deployed yet or had actually worked their job before. So they kind of like threw me into it. Then they started QCing me, qualifying me on doing different jobs in different positions and running different positions.
Can you tell me about those positions?
Patrolling the streets like a regular police officer would. Gate guard duty, which would be securing the base. Flight line duty, which would be you pretty much are in charge of securing the flight line on the base to make sure that all the aircraft and things that go with the aircraft are maintained safely and always on watch. And then it was just other various things like less than lethal uses of force and apprehension techniques and various techniques and trainings constantly as to making me a better cop and not focused more on the combat side of things.
How did that make you feel? How did you respond to that?
It went well. I kind of had a good overview of everything, especially coming from a deployment already. So it was kind of like more comfortable in my military skin. So once you get more comfortable in the military skin of things, then the orders and the understandings of the orders being given to you kind of make sense more.
Okay.
Which made the transition easier.
That is so great to hear. How was your recreational time now that you're back in the States?
Well, that time was okay. I tried to be a normal kid. I was only 19. Well, I might have been 20. I still wasn't 21 yet, so still couldn't legally go out and drink or go to the bars with all of my friends. So I kind of found other things that I enjoyed doing. So like I turned to pool, playing billiards or bowling. You know, just those sorts of things, try and keep me out of trouble. I worked midnights. That's where I was the most comfortable. So like my night times were work and then my day times were sleep. So I didn't really have to worry about much of anything. And that lasted for 6 months. And then I was pulled off of work again and put on another deployment team.
Okay, tell me about that.
I was put on a volunteer-only combat mission that come down through the Air Force.
Okay, so let me just back up a little bit. All right, so you're at Wright, Pat, and
Yes.
they say, okay, you've got to go back.
Well, what had happened is sometimes there are special jobs that are kind of out of the norm that come through the system that you can volunteer for.
Okay.
Because there's constant rotations. So like once you get in, you fit in a single rotation so that way when your next rotation comes up, that's where you're going. Well, for this mission, I heard of a special mission that was a 365, a full year tour, and it was a police transition team mission, and I didn't really understand what that meant. I was like, okay, this sounds fun. It's unique to the Air Force. A lot of people don't really do this, so I'll volunteer. So I ended up being one of 326 guys out of the entire Air Force Security Forces.
Wow.
To be picked for this mission based off of my skill set, my training, and rank. Excuse me. So the 365 is a full year tour that put us with Iraqi police officers, and our job and mission was to teach them how to be police officers, like you would expect to see here in the U.S.
Where did you go this time?
I was first sent to Fob Mahmadia, which is what the locals used to call the Triangle of Death. It was one of the areas in the Triangle. RAO, area of operation at that time, was the Triangle itself. So we traveled the Triangle daily, visiting all the police stations in the various cities. We did that for 6 months, and then we moved up to Camp Stryker, which was just south of Baghdad, and we were there for 6 months and operated Abu Ghraib area and southern Baghdad.
Okay, let me ask you 2 questions. How did your parents feel about this second one, especially when you volunteered?
This one scared the crap out of them.
And how did you feel?
I didn't know what to feel. I was excited because I was going on another mission. I was excited because I was doing a mission that's out of the norm. So I felt it was going to end up being a good story to tell, if nothing else. So that was kind of like where I was in my mindset with going into this.
Okay, so you're in Abu Ghraib. What happened there?
Well, we did a lot of missions outside the wire. I think total, they estimated every time we left the wire as a combat mission. So each combat mission, I think I totaled 326 combat missions while I was there for the year. This entailed us going to Iraqi police stations, understanding what they were doing within the police station. One of the police stations we were attached to were in charge of checkpoints in the country. So we would actually have to go and sit at checkpoints on like main strips down Iraq and monitor, make sure they're checking cars properly, checking people properly. It wasn't really all too eventful. You had a lot of like IED scares. We didn't lose a lot of people personally. We only lost one person physically, but you see a lot of Army personnel coming back, missing squads of people, or 2 or 3 people. So if you paid attention, it was hard not to get affected by it, because the world outside of your whole unit is a lot larger than just your unit. So like, there would be streets we would travel down and we would make it home safe. 20 minutes later, an Army crew would come through missing a whole truck, and they just traveled the same road we were on. So it's like those tools in your mind as to like, that could have been me if I was just 20 minutes later type of deal. So
Okay. So we go through that, and your year there is coming to a close. Can you walk me through how that goes?
Well, a full year, because the Air Force doesn't do a full year tour normally. It's mandated to take 2 weeks off somewhere in that year time frame to kind of like reset your mind. So they try and wait. I think they tried to make it roughly about 3 months in, so that they could get all of us in, because they couldn't lose a whole squad. So I took my 2 weeks in August of 2009, end of August 2009. Beginning of September 2nd of 2009, my squad was hit by an EFP that took out our 3rd truck. It killed our lieutenant in combat, and we lost our gunner due to injury. So he was sent to Walter Reed. That happened 2 days before I returned back to country after my 2 weeks leave. So I returned back to the memorial service. Like, I got off the bus, dropped my stuff, and went to my lieutenant's service. Then we were sent to the green zone for 2 weeks. After that, this is like mid-September now. So I stayed up there, and they kind of like, that was for our squad to kind of like calm down and not sent back out in combat missions, which didn't make sense because we still had to drive all the way to the green zone and then all the way back. So it was kind of like its own mission in itself. From there, our missions kind of got lighter and lighter because of what we had gone through. We were the only Air Force squad to lose somebody. So it being like that with this group, we were kind of like treated differently, I guess you could say, because of the experience of the squadron. So kind of calmed down and eased out of everything and the transitions of everything while I was there. So that was like towards the end of my career, or towards the end of my deployment. So it didn't last much longer after that. Just, we still did missions and did our normal thing, just with that coming home and then that break,
Okay, so we're done with Iraq. You
We're
did
done.
two tours.
Yes.
And then we didn't go back anymore.
Correct.
Okay, so we come home. We're still active duty.
Yes.
What do you do? Are you back in your same position, same squad, same? Is it just business as usual?
It is, but this time I'm not put on midnights when I get back. I'm not really put on flight. I was more or less like a trainer. Like I had now had extra training that most of the Air Force didn't have. Like, because of this deployment, I was taught building clearing by the Army infantry. So that was something we needed to know how to do, is building clearing. Who best to teach you than some infantry guys that do that on a regular basis? So it was like stuff like this that helped further my career, which then in turn made what I now knew and possessed, being running like a cop job in a third world country, to coming back to Wright-Patterson and training all these young troops that had never experienced anything like this, or not even their real job here in the Air Force. So they kind of stuck me there to train the younger troops, kind of push them forward, because I had done stuff that most people don't do. I deployed really, really quickly. That's something that you can't prepare someone for. So with that type of stuff, they kind of used me almost like a mentor role when I first got back. So.
Do you have any particular mentees that you still talk to, or?
No.
No.
Yeah, no.
All right. When you came home, was there any type of reception for you?
No.
How did your family feel when you got home?
My family grew up poor, and so if it didn't fit in the budget, we didn't do it. So my parents didn't make it to my graduation from boot camp. They didn't make it to any of my returns home from Iraq, or to send me off to either deployment. So I was kind of just did it all on my own.
Okay, that had to make you a very strong airman.
No, I don't know about all that, but I did it. So.
Well, thank you for doing it. Okay. What happens next? You're training, and then you ETS?
Well, I was diagnosed with, well, I wasn't diagnosed. It was deemed that I had the potential for PTSD diagnosis while I was still overseas, getting ready to process out of Kuwait to come back home to the U.S. So with that mandate, it's mandated that you're seen for help through the hospital. Well, I fought the hospital for 6 months here at Wright-Patterson to get me help for my PTSD, and I wasn't seen. I didn't receive any medications. I actually had a higher up step in to help me get help, but it took too long. And with everything that I was dealing with, I took matters into my own hands to try and help myself maintain the respect I had earned within our security forces community, as well as at the base and everything. So I didn't want to lose that. So my decisions essentially led to me getting removed from my job and it ended up getting me discharged from the service with general under honorable conditions.
Okay. All right. So we're all done with the military. How did you readjust to civilian life?
It was hard. I lost everything. I became homeless, had no car. No, I had nothing. I drove in a car with expired tags about 223 miles to Youngstown. So I had a place to stay with my grandparents, and I lived with my grandparents in their basement for a year. Through that time, I went and saw the VA, got a PTSD diagnosis, got my TBI diagnosis, as well as some physical issues. And once I got my back pay, I upped and moved from Ohio to Arizona.
Okay. And what did you do in Arizona?
I was in Arizona. I got there, I got reevaluated through the VA. I was deemed 90% disabled and unemployable at that time. So I kind of just tried to enjoy the weather and exist in a way to try and find a way to heal myself, and that's pretty much what I did in Arizona.
Okay. You're in Ohio now.
I'm in Ohio now.
So you come back?
I come back for my grandmother. My grandfather on my mom's side, who was a retired E8 from the Army, had passed away a few years before this from cancer, and my grandmother had cancer again for the second time. And we didn't know if she was going to make it or not, so I up and packed up all my stuff and moved back to Ohio so I could try and take care of her.
That's touching. Okay. So how long at this point had you been out of the military?
3 years.
Okay, so you're 3 years out. How do you think the military experience affected your life?
It affects my life every day. The military experience itself both changed me internally, changed me mentally, and it changed the reaction to society. So I guess in some ways it changed me for the good, but in a lot of ways it changes you for the bad, because society's not meant for us to fit back into it.
What do you do now?
I took it upon myself to make sure that veterans, especially new veterans, didn't come out and experience the same things I did. So I created my own nonprofit organization, Veterans Ending the Stigma, to do exactly what the title says, to end the stigma on veterans, to try and show them different pathways of reintegration. And how I tried to do this with the mission is by changing the perception of the word. It's constantly just a word or a stereotype that is implied to somebody. So when you're dealing with veterans committing suicide like we are at an exponential rate, you know, that word suicide automatically causes a train of thought in people. And a lot of times it's the same, and a lot of times it's different because of Hollywood, and someone might know someone that's done it. So everyone's perception is different, but we're trying to build the understanding of what is that perception, and then trying to build the understanding from that perception to understand why it is that way. So in so doing that, our hope is to change the thought process completely, and not so much start stereotyping somebody or judging somebody immediately, but more so asking, how can I help you? Or treating them just like a human and not as that stereotype. So that way we can start a conversation between people that might be beneficial or like one another or be friends with one another, which in turn will change the whole perception of the veteran themselves.
That sounds huge.
It's a big feat.
Okay. I wish you the best of luck in that. Is there anything you felt like we haven't discussed that you would like to discuss?
No, I can't think of anything.
All right. What message would you like to leave for future generations that view this interview?
There's always someone out there that'll help you. You just have to kind of suck it up and realize that you're not above asking for it. Because I know, like, for me and a lot of my friends that got out of the service right around the same time I did, we are a proud group of people. And it takes that pride to actually ask for help. It's not being prideful to not ask for help, to try and do it on your own, but reach out to somebody, especially someone that might have experienced the same thing you have, because they're willing to help or might have new techniques to teach you that could help.
Okay. That's a great message. I'll be sure to get that out there. All right. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm going to conclude this interview with Robert Kowalski at the Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. Thank you.